everybody cooperated so fast, we're going to go ahead and start. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Brano. I'm the Vice President for Advancement and University Relations here at University of Houston downtown. It is a true privilege to welcome you this evening and to stand alongside President Blanchard and so many dedicated colleagues who work tirelessly to bring meaningful programs like this to life. As many of you all know, the President's Lecture Series is one of the UHD's signature initiatives, a platform designed to bring our campus and community together to explore significant ideas, exchange diverse perspectives, and engage in thoughtful dialogue about the most pressing issues of our time. At UHD, we take great pride in being a place where conversation is not only encouraged, but celebrated. This series offers us the opportunity to hear directly from our industry leaders, policymakers, scholars, and change makers whose insights prepare our students and all of us to better understand, navigate, and lead an ever-changing world. Tonight's program is the second part of our lecture series that continues to take us back 20 years as we reflect on one of the most devastating storms in our nation's history, Hurricane Katrina. It is now my great honor to introduce Don McCarty, who will introduce our distinguished speaker tonight. Don?
Welcome, everyone. Many of you know Angela Blanchard from her transformative leadership as CEO and president of Baker Ripley, where she helped shape Houston, along with many other people in this room, into one of the most welcoming cities in the nation. A place where the hard work and hopes of any person could lead to a meaningful life. Since then, Angela's impact has become global. Over the past 2 decades, her work responding to disaster and displacement, from Hurricane Katrina to crises around the world, has taught her and now teaches us what it takes to care for people and entire communities in times of profound disruption. I can tell you from my own experience over the past 15 years, every single encounter with Angela has left me changed. She has a rare gift, not only for sharing insight, but also for inspiring action. Through her life and work, she shows us what's possible when one person chooses curiosity, courage, and the belief that we are better together. Tonight, you'll leave with ideas and insights, and most importantly, a sense of hope to carry forward into our collective future. It is my honor to welcome to the stage Angela Blanchard.
So this is super exciting for me. Tonight's talk is a somewhat bigger version of a talk I've given on 6 continents in a dozen countries, but not here in my own hometown, even though all of you and all that we've done here inspired it. So I want to first say thank you to Dawn, who sat at my table and listened to me talk about this, and a lot. Thank you, Dawn. And then helped arrange this. And in case you all got confused, when they spoke of President Blanchard, they were not referring to me. So Dr. Blanchard is president of UH Downtown and comes from Louisiana. We're most certainly relatives because all Blanchards are related. Although I did tell him that we'd be happy to claim him. I'm not sure he'd want to claim us. But we'll go with, he says his family has stories too. So I want to start with just making clear the place from which I speak tonight. This project kind of breaks a rule or two. It focuses on what help looks like on the ground in neighborhoods, camps, cities, and communities where people land. And it refuses to categorize displaced people based on the source of the catastrophe or the system we assign them to. War or weather, loss of health or wealth send us scrambling for higher ground. And the subject tonight is now what? What happens next? So I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scholar. I didn't maintain objectivity. In fact, I kind of fell in love with most of the people that I met on these trips. And when I accepted invitations to go a place, I went with the idea that I would make a friend, and I almost always did. And it's their wisdom I'll be sharing tonight. So I want to mention a couple people tonight because, I'm totally surprised. Two of my sisters are here, and one of my sisters has actually trained teachers in over 50 countries. And she and I like to say we maintain kind of an anthropological lens, but she's seen so much more of the world than I have. But and has brought me back many a story that helped me shape how I think about things. And then also, my other sister, Frances, is also here. She's an everyday worker in a shelter, and that's after a long career serving her community as an education leader and a number of other things. So both of them share my passion for doing good for others, and they're also just really lovely human beings. In any storm that's in the Gulf, I'd want them on my team. My mom is also here, but you'll meet her a little later. And so in the talk, I didn't know she was coming. So so there may be some on-the-fly edits. I would start with a quote from we are all vulnerable creatures on a common journey, because I think that most of us believe and want and try to orchestrate our lives such that we avoid catastrophic disruption. We make huge investments in safety, security, and predictability. We like the things we most depend upon to be dependable. We want what's routine, what should be routine, to be routine. And yet, we know that today, 122 million people are not living in their own homes. And so we know that at any time, catastrophic events can befall us as individuals. They can impact communities, and they can impact whole cities. So I wanted to say, as a reminder, we all sit here tonight because we descended from the people who survived wars and genocides and pandemics, the people who made it through all of life's most difficult hardships so that they could birth us and we could be here. So we carry within us the means and the knowledge and the wisdom to respond and to get through hard things and to do it together. So I came to feel, though, as I went around the world and did so much work in Houston with some wonderful people who found Houston as higher ground, I came to understand, though, I really trusted most those people who had been to hell and back. Because in the course of that journey, they had to get clarity about what mattered most to them. They had to get very distinctly clear about what they were willing to do for themselves and for others. So when war or weather, no distinction, I avoid the political conditions that create either my heart is entirely focused and squarely tuned into what happens next. So as I was teaching at Brown and explaining that, my real concern was how we nurture people and communities into wholeness after the unthinkable events, a student said to me, in a disappointed tone of voice, so really, you're just a humanitarian. And I have to say, I hope so. So it's important to tell you why disaster and why this idea of catastrophic upheaval is not foreign to me. Part of my father's story was having lost his mother at 6, and which landed him in an orphanage as a French-speaking Cajun child, being then raised by Irish nuns. There was a very particular accent, too, that emerged from Irish nuns teaching Cajun children English. When I was little, he said to me, and I have to tell you, forgive him in advance, my mom is here tonight, the two of them had 8 kids before they were 30. It was a lot. And so my dad says to me, you must help your mom, because, I lost my mom. And I think at that moment, I knew I knew his story about the orphanage, but I didn't know that things could just end and everything could be disrupted. But then I did know in that moment. And, you know, there are a lot of people that like to write that story as some sort of trauma inflicted upon me. But I choose to think about it as my awakening that things can go madly wrong. And in spite of that, we go on. And also, in my dad's case, we went on with a great deal of humor. When we were little and a hurricane came, just so you know, the relatives came to see us in Beaumont. And my dad's distant cousin, Harry Trahan, brought his accordion. And that was our definition of disaster. This was a time we made gumbo, we heard music, we hung out with the relatives. My mom was the one that actually went to the grocery store, filled the bathtubs, took care of the formula, got the diapers, all of that. My father chose to think about how to have a good time, and both of those things were necessary. But I want us to focus in on this concept of disaster, and that is an event so significant that it's revelatory. That, as one of my friends in emergency management says, if it doesn't shake your whole world, it's just an inconvenience. But disasters have a way of revealing. They reveal flaws. They reveal the broken nature of our systems. They sometimes show us who we are in moments when we may be our best selves, and then in the moments when we are not. But one way or another, once we've made it through, we see things differently. And it stands as a particular marker in our lives. And the things that I'll be talking about tonight are those things that remain forever in people's minds as a before and after. So when it was fine for us to treat hurricanes cavalierly when we were little because they were different. The water came in and the water went out. Katrina changed everything. In 2005, the water came in and came in and came in. It did not go out. And then in 2008, what we used to call the tidal wave overtopped the seawall and flooded Galveston. And in 2017, Harvey rained out a city. So the water isn't going anywhere, it's rising. So I choose to think not, again, as the origin of these conditions, but as the story of now what. So Katrina taught me, though, because that's where my journey begins. Before that, hurricanes were parties. Katrina taught me, no, that it was possible that this catastrophic thing would happen and no one would come. And we really had no concept of that before because it was always manageable. What we faced had always been somehow manageable in the context of our world. So what Katrina taught me is how we respond, what we do or don't do is entirely shaped by our beliefs about people. If we look at the people most impacted and we think that could be us, we must get to them. If we look at people most impacted and we think they could never have prevented this, we have to show up for them. That's one set of responses and one set of beliefs. If we start in the moment parsing their worthiness, we start making decisions and choices and forming ideas about why they're in that predicament and give ourselves a way out so we don't respond, then we get this. I know most of you recall and you think about what Houston did, but I will never forget what we all collectively didn't do. And when these messages grew more and more desperate, and when the people suffered more and more, and the threats were there of them dying, there was still a narrative being written about why they were in so much trouble and how it was really their fault. And then we saw something similar happen in Puerto Rico, where message after desperate message went out saying, can you please come to us? We have no food, we have no water. And we took a long time again, because the narrative went something like this. Puerto Rico just waits for hurricanes and doesn't take care of its own infrastructure. That's why it fell down. We wrote ourselves a way out. When people were first on the roofs in New Orleans, I wrote the excuses, because in my world, the water came in, the water went out, and I think, oh, we're not getting it because we don't realize the water's not going out. We've got to go. And then over time, it became clear that we were weaving the wrong stories about the people, those neighbors of ours, our relatives in New Orleans, and we did the same thing in Puerto Rico. So it has been 20 years, and I have seen every report, and I've seen every documentary, and I've read everything the institutes of higher learning have written. And the one thing that no one has ever said is, I am sorry. For those of you here who lived through Katrina, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't figure it out sooner. I'm so sorry we didn't get to you sooner. I'm sorry you were stranded, and I'm sorry if you weren't stranded, you had to watch people you love beg for help. I'm sorry it took us so long, and we let wrong stories and bad beliefs get in the way of doing the right thing in the moment. And that I'm sorry has to stand, because we don't want to do that again to anyone else. So, Houston, we ought to know how to do this. These are just a random list of some of the things that have gone on for the last 20 years, because, I think we have a general idea that we just like to try it all. The plant explosions, and then a derecho, which we had to learn how to spell and pronounce. And then there was Uri, which kind of just dropped in on us. And in a season where we're accustomed to not thinking about the weather. So we ought to know a lot, and as it turns out, we do. We're a high-functioning city, and it's good because we are an essential city. We are a city that very much has to remain functional. The world relies on us. They rely on our port. They rely on our energy production. They rely on our medical center. We're an essential city, and operating as if it's absolutely essential that we be up and running is an important part of every leader in Houston's responsibility. So these are stages that I think I discovered in the course of discussing how things were going for the people who had become overnight our, quote, clients, those individuals coming from New Orleans. And in one short space of time, we had an additional 27,000 people on a list, on a rolls, that we were supposed to help navigate the decisions that were going to affect them. Where were they going to land? Where were they going to go? Where are they staying? Where are they going home? Et cetera. So in the midst of all this, we were also saying, tell us what it's like for you. And we owe a huge, huge debt of gratitude to the people who came here from Louisiana and Mississippi, because they told us about their experience. They prepared us, because if you'll remember, Rita and Ike followed very quickly, and our response to those very much looked like informed by the wisdom that we had learned from our new neighbors. I want to say also that most disaster talks focus on the dramatic first 6 weeks, the first month, but most of the work is carried out over 5 years with a literal army of people. So you'll meet some of those people tonight. So the first stage is safety, sanctuary. We want to survive. We want to land, and we want to land in a welcoming place and be treated with a measure of dignity, despite how the conditions that we show up in. So what we saw in the dome, what we remember from those images, what I remember about all of you is the way you showed up, the way you were willing to do any task and any job, and you brought anything you thought could be helpful to the dome. There was a lady, I do recall, probably has learned a thing or two since, but she did bring her very, very sparkly, missing only one sequin, size 0 gown to the dome and to donate. And we did not have a big need for size 0 sparkly ball gowns with one missing sequin. But the spirit of it, the intention was really good. So we all know quite a bit. If we've done this work, you know a lot about the things that people bring that might be helpful, but usually aren't. So But I think Reverend McKee summed it up for me. Reverend McKee has passed since Katrina. I saw him in New Orleans just constantly helping other people, so I presumed we would say in New Orleans, were you wet, were you dry? And I presumed he was dry because he was spending all this time helping others. And it turned out his house was a soggy mess with a caved-in roof. But what helped him was to be able to look after the people in his church. So we are very good at standing up a welcoming place. And this is what it looked like. And I just, as a show of hands, were you there? Yeah. So you remember what it looked like, what it felt like, and the utter, warmth and chaos of the place. These were the scenes we saw every day, people just trying to figure out what to do, where to go. And we didn't have as much use of technology then as we do now. So this board with all these tagged messages served as a center where people who were trying to find their families could go and did go. And there were just many, many times when we were standing with someone desperate to locate family members. In any disaster, in any set of circumstances, it is quite possible that your child could be spending the night with the grandmother. It's equally possible that your husband could have been away at work, off-site, out of the city. It's also possible that people that you would usually care for, you were separated from in the course of trying to find your way to a bus after days and days on a roof or in the Superdome. So most people arrived in desperate need to find a loved one. And this was the Chronicles front page, and someone kindly brought that, a real-life copy tonight. But this was one instance in which there were 17 family members scattered across 5 cities. And the Baker Ripley team went about finding every one of these family members. And it was San Antonio and Dallas and Phoenix. And we located everyone. And then we had, I think, Tony, who's in that picture, Tony Moreno might be here, as she drove halfway to San Antonio to pick up a family member, bring that member back. And they were all reunited at George R. Brown. So this was a lot of the intense initial work. We were doing everything we knew how to do to get people fed and comfortable and dry and warm and connected. So fast forward, and it's August 29th, and that is the day we opened the shelter on the 12th anniversary of Katrina, which really gave me all kinds of chills. Because Katrina lingers in our minds as this, it was not just a before and after event for everyone who lived through it, but all of us who watched and helped as well. It was a moment of reckoning for our country about systems and how they worked and how they didn't, and also in a place where so many of us had celebrated and had a good time. We saw its vulnerabilities, and we saw what could happen. And deeply affected, and almost no one likes to bring up Katrina when you're responding to another disaster because of the memories it evokes. So that day, I was thinking, oh my gosh, we've got to get this right. How do we make this work? All the lessons from Katrina and the other disasters came to me in the rules that we put in place. We got all kinds of accolades for how beautifully well-run this center was, how warmly and effectively we sheltered people. All of that wisdom came from learning what we did and didn't do well when we welcomed the people from Louisiana. So the first rule, and this was a come hell or high water, don't you dare and I'll throw you out if you do. We only use neighbor or guest. We didn't call people refugees. We didn't call them evacuees. We didn't name them anything that created a separateness from us. These were our people. People from Louisiana began coming to Houston 2 days before the storm. All of our community centers, the pantries had emptied out because relatives those that could leave had come to stay with their relatives. In the case of Harvey, we knew We knew that there were going to be people coming who knew already that they were going to be underwater, and we also knew there would be people that just found themselves stranded. Overall, here's a couple of other things we remembered, that how utterly demeaning it is when the only things you own are wet and a trash bag, and the first person that you encounter at the door is a security guard who wants to go through all of your remaining things. And we remembered how that felt, and then remembered what it felt like to just walk into the chaos of the dome. And we also remembered that people needed clothes, and while people brought things, including cocktail dresses with one missing sequin, that people had to paw through mounds of clothing to try to find something that worked. We resolved that we weren't going to have that. We remembered also that in storms and disasters, they happen in the middle of life. So people were sick, and people were pregnant, and people were in need of medical care because they had waded through water and hurt themselves. So we stood up a clinic, we stood up an area, a resource area, which Chevron came in and organized like a store. We corrected our language. We had, yes, people did have to go through security because disasters create fear. And you know, in Texas, I think whenever we get scared, you know, we bring our guns. So we had to encourage 357 people to relinquish their guns with the promise that we would give it right back to them on their way out. And so, because we didn't need that. So all of that security check-in was necessary, but the very next thing that happened is somebody met them, carried their things, checked them in, and walked them to a cot. Once they were in the area where there were cots, we let no media in there, and all the people that showed up thinking this is their selfie moment, I invited them to leave because I explained this is now their bedroom, and you don't have the right to take a picture of them on the hardest day of their life in what is now their bedroom. So by establishing those rules, we created a measure. We did what we could with what we had to have dignity and safety. And then because it's Houston, I think the first night we checked in people that were, I think we used the first night 29 languages. I did, and I regret this today, I forgot to get sign language as an option. And that's something that I think in all of these disasters, I realize always out of my peripheral vision is the awareness that there was some minute when I could have done better for people with disabilities and handicaps. So the measure to me of a great city is not who's there, it's who's welcome there, who can thrive, who can make a life, who can make a living, who can create a family, put down roots. Houston has been that city for so many people. And that welcome that we stood up, the message went out. The world watched us do that. And all the invitations that came after Katrina and continued all the way through Harvey stemmed from the fact that people saw us not only welcoming New Orleanians and our neighbors from Louisiana and Mississippi, but they saw that we were evolving to be the most diverse city in the United States. So at the same time, these people are coming in to settle into our neighborhoods from all over the world, from trouble spots everywhere. And we were receiving the people who were displaced by storms. And that got the attention of cities around the world faced with similar challenges. So the invitations I got to speak and visit and talk and learn all came from the work that we did here and making it clear that you were welcome in Houston and that we wanted you here and we believed you would be worth something and we would make an investment in you and create a place for you to land. So after the initial stage, after the immediacy, the immediate moment of safety and sanctuary, your mind immediately turns to, what do I have to do? How do I get out of here? What do I have to work with? What can I do? So you're told, please sit here at this desk, fill out this form, go here, answer these questions. This is what you have to do. And this encounter, this immediate encounter that you have in a shaken and vulnerable state with this kind of faceless system this algorithm, this set of forms. It's daunting and it's frustrating because you don't have any of the things you need. And what matters most, and what you most want to do, and this is where we learned so much from the New Orleanians, is they would sit with us and they just wanted to tell their story. They wanted us to see them, to hear them, to understand how they got there. And then the next thing is to really tell us who they were. And that's not on a form. So we made a new form. And it started with, tell us your story, how did you get here? And the second part of that was, tell us your strengths, your resources, your talents, your skills, your relationships. Tell us about every resource you have that could mean the difference for you in rebuilding your life. What could help? And when we wrote all of that down, we still had to fill out the miserable, bureaucratic, heartbreaking, high stakes, difficult forms that attend both immigration and disasters, all of which in one single sentence, one single question, and you get it wrong, can just end your chances. We still have to do all that, but we make a space for people to say how they got here, to tell us who they are. People want to be seen, and you cannot do that with an app. So we see this, and then this is the great thing about, let me just say, this is the exciting thing about disasters. We all, the rest of us, figure out, remember who we are. We suddenly remember, human being. Other human beings. I should go. And so we show up, and we show up in huge numbers. In the last 3 or 4 disasters, one of the calls that had to go out was, please stop coming. Every day at NRG, I had to go out with a bullhorn, and I had to stand in front of a crowd just like this one every single day and say, thank you so much. We have a ratio of 1 volunteer for every guest. We don't have any more room, and people would get angry. They were like, but I can only come today. I really want to volunteer. And what is it that drives us? Nobody issued a playbook. You're not signed up. You don't have directions. And some people are just willing to do whatever, anything, to be a part of it. Why? Because we want to be together. We want to be together in those moments when the only thing at stake on the table is our shared humanity. We crave it. People poured into Central Texas, where I'll be next month, and it was the same thing. We saw these people, we saw them hurting, we said, I need to come and help. And most of us who've done this work say, for as long as we can keep that alive, and as long as we can make that last, that's the task of leadership. I like to think that we should have a good time whenever possible, even in the middle of a storm, if one can, upbringing. So I had a thing, allow anything that is not destructive. If a band wants to come ahead. If somebody wants to paint, go right ahead. Whatever we can do that brings people together and causes a moment of celebration and a relief from the struggle. And that includes, that's in shelters or in camps, in community centers, anything not destructive. But I almost had to eat my words because I know y'all know that Ed explained to me after he invited me to open this shelter it has to be a pet-friendly shelter. And I'm like, well, does that mean we could just wave at them as they go by? Because, we got people, animals, I'm thinking people. And don't hate me, you pet-loving folk. But I wasn't quite sure how you checked in a pet. But it turned out there were people in the city who knew how to do it. But then there came a bunch of people, a big group of people, all decked out in clothes, flags everywhere. And on the arm of one of the people was an eagle, not like a real one, a real eagle, perched on the arm. And they said, we wanted to come, and we want the eagle to fly around, and we play the Star Spangled Banner. And I'm thinking, this might be different. How's this going to work? And so, but I can see that no objections to it. And so I say, yes, by all means, Star Spangled Banner. And so the opening strains, "Oh, say, can you see?" And then the eagle takes off. And then I remember that we have a shelter full of tiny little useless dogs. And I have a moment of just utter panic. Like, did they feed that eagle? Does the eagle know? Does he understand the job? So the eagle did return, no further incidents, but I was already reading in my mind the headline, Eagle kills pet. And then there was another group of people that came in Santa outfits and brought Santa Claus, like teddy bears. And I still think there might be some confused children as to why we were having Christmas at NRG in August. But allow everything that is not destructive. When we go now to Germany, because I was asked by the German government to come and talk with them about how we were managing, because as Syrians flowed into Germany, the Germans were wanting to be quite organized about this. They are very rule-oriented, and organization is a source of pride for them. So they had really deliberate ways of going about everything. And sheltering people was the first thing, like how do we get a place for them to land? So this was the balloon shelter, and it was run by a Syrian man. He had been in Germany a few years already, and they recruited him to run this. It was the most beautifully run shelter. It had light, it had art, it had welcome. And then I love this part because in Germany, also, people poured in to help. And so every time a volunteer would come and help, they'd take their name tag and place it on this wall as they were leaving. So it became just a living record of all the people that showed up to work there and to welcome people that were going to have to live in the balloon shelter for quite some time. So the kids, however, didn't have a lot to do. One of the first commandments of welcome is organize the activities for the children, whether it's a shelter, a camp, or a community center. It gives order to the day. When you invest in people's children, they settle down, they believe they might truly be all right. And then on top of that, it allows parents to have the time they need to go and take care of the tasks of navigating a new world they're in. So this was a project done with spray paint cans, and that brave person is my son, who managed to pull this off with no one getting sprayed and no one in this entire group speaking the same language. So contrast to Tempelhof. So here's Tempelhof. It's a very old airport, and the Germans like it, and they thought it would work well as a shelter. And it's quite ominous. And then they thought also they needed a lot of security, but then it ended up the security kind of made it feel like you were locked in, not that you were being saved. And also, there's a very precise number. You have to have so many square feet per UNH, for the UNHCR guidelines for sheltering. I think it's 4 by 6 feet. And even though they had this enormous space, they built those cubicles, the precise to the inch, the size. So in those moments, I did kind of think, I kind of love our American, we'll sort of kind of do it, but maybe not. Let's see what happens. So, but what is true about them is that this was a moment for them as Syrians were arriving in which they wanted to prove to themselves and the world they could do this, they could do it well, and they could make it work. And so many good ideas came from them, but we also traded some good things that we had learned here. The next stage is limbo, because you've done everything you know how to do. You've tried to deal with the bureaucracies. You've run at everything trying to get back to normal, which is off the table, but you don't quite know it yet, and you're exhausted. And I want to just turn now and read from Sharon, who was in Lakeview in New Orleans. She recalled this stage, and she says, "We had worked so hard and faced so many losses of community, of routine, of things, and we'd worked so hard to try to navigate all the complications. We finally just collapsed. I feel like we slept for 6 months, or at least it felt that way. It seemed that everywhere we turned was another mountain to climb, another complication, some overwhelming situation. So we just stopped. I remember wondering if we were ever going to come out of this stage. She also shared at that stage in New Orleans, when people would go back, they would mow the grass in their yards as a sign that they meant to return. This was trying to signal one another and neighbors, because New Orleanians did not go back to New Orleans. They went back to Treme, they went back to Central City, they went back to Lower Ninth, they went back to Lakeview, because New Orleans was a city of neighborhoods. And it's important to remind Houstonians of this. Some 70% of the people in this region were born somewhere else. Some, like me, just up the road in Beaumont, and some in Pakistan. New Orleanians, 70%. When Katrina struck, 70% of the people in New Orleans were born in New Orleans, and their parents were born in New Orleans. So they had roots and ways and were tied and connected to a place in ways most Houstonians did not appreciate. It led to some grave misunderstandings. There were some lovely New Orleans who said to me very gently, well, we really believe that Houston has such an enormous heart, but you just don't have any soul. So they somehow found that formula, job, house, and a car, not the complete formula they were looking for. But coming to terms in limbo with our helplessness, and this is a message to helpers, when you see people frozen, it's not a time to exhort them to work harder, try harder, do more. You're not supposed to flog them into action. Understand that the work of recovery in this stage is going on inside. It's a slow coming to terms. So yes, and this is not a slide simply for the purpose of illustrating what it feels like to be a fish out of water. This was the fence in my brother's backyard after Ike in Bridge City, because the water got very, very high. The next place we're going is Lebanon, because it's important to understand we can get stuck in any of these stages. And there's some people in the world, millions, living in a permanent state of limbo. And we go to Lebanon because of because Lebanon and Burj al-Shamali, the camp in Tyre, Lebanon, is absolute proof that under any conditions and all circumstances, people want community. People will put a roof over community. People will volunteer on behalf of their place, of their community, and try to create a inclusiveness. So these young people that you see here, they had sought to do a map of the camp. It's only 1 square mile, 21,000 people live there. And since the law, technically, one's not allowed to bring in building materials. So all the entire camp is improvised. It's just makeshift structures, one built on top of the other, layers of families that have grown up there, and these kids were born there. And so they sought to create a map of the camp because there were all these people coming in after the fall of Syria, many of them women, older, and they didn't have their spouses because their spouses had gone on to try to find a way to Europe through Turkey or Greece or some other way. And so the kids thought, well, they could grow herbs, the herbs we use in cooking, but we need to find a rooftop because there's no ground space. So then they started putting up helium balloons to photograph the camp from the air, but it's a Hezbollah-controlled area, so those were shot down. And so it took them many, many tries to wind their way to the top to be able to photograph the camp, and then send it off to have the photographs assembled so they could create those gardens. The young man on the far left, so this is Mustafa, Faraz, and Amal, and I remain connected to both Mustafa and Faraz. They were planning to come to the United States and invited by MIT to talk about their project because now there's great interest in improvised solutions in the world and the marriage of those with advanced technology. And unfortunately, though, we closed the borders to people like them coming from that place. So Mustafa went to work in Lebanon. If you're a stateless person, as they are, you're not allowed to have a certain category of job. So you could be a nurse but never a doctor. You could be a clerk but not a lawyer. So Mustafa set out to be a nurse. It was something he really wanted to do, and he began studying. And the whole time I've known him, he's been studying and taking these tests. And when the current conflict spilled over into southern Lebanon, they had to flee the camp. But he also had to take the final test to get to the UK. And he took it, and he passed it. And so he wrote me a letter this week, and he wanted me to share it with you. So we were talking about what it's like to be short of money. And in his case, he ran out and it was quite difficult for him to tell me that he had run out of money and therefore wasn't able to buy food. And so I said, I remember, and his embarrassment about that was touching, because after all that he's done, he felt somehow that he was not succeeding. But I shared with him in college I ran out of money more than once. And I did once eat oatmeal for a week, and he says, "What is this oatmeal?" And I said, "Well, you just boil oats and eat them." And he said, "Oh," and he holds up, he says, "These are oats, we are the same." And and I say, the way we want to be with people in the world, even when we're helping them, no matter how different our circumstances, we want to be in solidarity, because what we want is to be able to say, we are the same. So I'm so proud of him. He's doing very, very well. He's navigating London and having spent most of his life in 1 square mile. He's now got an entire city to navigate. He's living with perfect strangers, a big group of them in a tiny space. But for him, this is the only option. And he said, I don't want to complain. I don't want to sound not grateful, because I am. But there was no other option. There was nothing else for me, no means to make a living, no way to care for my family or ever have one if I stayed. So anyway, I'll keep you updated. So I want to take a pause here in case you need a break. And I want to say also, this is heavy material, and you could just be watching. You could be like binging on Netflix and hanging with your pals. So if at any point it gets to be too much and you need to leave, it's okay, and I won't take it personally. Of course, you'll miss really good stories, but hey, can't have everything. So the hottest fire that ever burned on Earth burned in King Lake on Black Saturday. And it was a collection of fires, and the extent of the damage those fires did, that they released the energy of a small nuclear weapon. People died in the fire, lost their lives to the fire, but people near the fire lost their lives. The fires were so big, it sucked the oxygen. There was literally no air to breathe, so people suffocated. And this is in a place where people are routinely volunteering to fight these fires. They have a force in some of the states in Australia that's 40,000 strong of volunteer firefighters who are trained. These firefighters, these particular firefighters, I went to be with, and they fought a fire at top of a ridge without knowing that there was another fire coming from the town they left, from their own community. And they left their community not knowing that, and went to fight a fire in another town, and fought that fire having to listen to the cries for help that they couldn't answer. The horror of that, and then as we're learning also in Central Texas, these are the people that respond, but these are also community members that they're the ones that have to find the bodies. They're the ones that do all the rest of the work too. When I went to be with them, I was very curious as to what I could possibly have to offer that community. And we sat in a great big circle, and the aftermath, all things are organized in circles if they're done well. And they started to tell me that we wanted you to come because we wanted you to tell us everything about New Orleans. And we want to know all about Katrina. We want to know all about the city. We want to know what it was like and what happened to them. because they felt like they had endured something that was so horrible and no one wanted to hear it. No one wanted them to talk about what it was really like, and they thought that maybe the only people that they were aware of that might understand what they felt were people from New Orleans. So we call it storm solidarity, but we were able to get a group of people from that area connected to people in New Orleans, and of course, New Orleans, true to form, incredibly generous and hospitable, welcomed them, and also they got to learn from one another. So we get stranded in these stages if we feel like the experience we've had has made us unreachable, and that we've now moved to a category of experience that no one will embrace, no one will listen to. Sometimes it's been hard when I've had to listen to things I found, truly shocking. But I remind myself all the time, we can do this. We just have to remember they lived through it. All I have to do is hear it. And that careful listening really matters. So we come to resignation and acceptance. I'm really bad at this in life. I don't like anything that lands on the acceptance page. I resent it all. I want everything to be movable, solvable, fixable, addressable, etc. But the hardest thing we have to say to people, a mom recently called me, and she was talking about her daughter who made it through the flood in Central Texas, who was that mystic. And she said, I just want to know, when do we get back to normal? And it was having to say to her, never. The normal that you're thinking of is the thing that was true, the way you lived, how you saw the world before this happened. You and your family and your daughter have had this extraordinary experience. And so it's not about getting back. And this is when people start to realize that, the way is not back, and that we can't retrieve the way we lived before we came to this new understanding and dealt with these challenges. So I do like loving detachment. I do find that I often need that because people refuse to do what I tell them. And that I find that incredibly annoying. And I just wish I wore some sort of badge that flashed and it said, like, this woman's been thinking about this shit for 20 years. Like, she's not going to do what she said, but I don't have any badge like that. And so I'm forced to, try to convince people to do what I tell them. And loving detachment is really necessary. People won't always behave as we think they should, nor will their behavior necessarily reflect what we think is the best of humanity. So I say when I walk into a disaster arena, I do what I call advanced forgiveness. You're already forgiven. If you lose your temper, forgiven. If you sit and cry, forgiven. If you haven't showered in 3 days, 4 days, a week, forgiven. We just advance forgive. But there's another version of how people get to this stage, and they sit and they are furious and they're angry and they really believe that this particular disaster just picked on them. And I would be in places and they'd say, well, that other neighborhood's getting everything, we're not getting anything. I'm like, I was just there, just 15 minutes away, and I promise they're not. But people will adopt a story about why it's so hard, and then they'll live in that story. So I was in Galveston after Ike, and when Ike hit, all the signs in Galveston were then in Houston. So this business, this bar, this not a fancy joint, right? They had hand-lettered their own sign, Hard Times and Misery Saloon. So I like to remind people, when the worst happens, don't go into the Hard Times and Misery Saloon. Climb up on the bar stool and tell everybody how unfair and awful and terrible your life is. Because in the 8 billion people on earth, somebody else is living your story right now, living your circumstances right now, wishing they could be you. So just remember to not get stuck in the unfairness of it all. When the derecho struck, why would it be that Kashmir Gardens, which is already one of the most challenged neighborhoods, one of the neighborhoods that we need to invest in so badly, why would it be so much of the damage got done there? It's not fair. Nothing about disasters That's, there is no recovery where the scales of the universe just balance perfectly. But don't move into the hard times and misery saloon. Nobody wants to hear your sad story. So, I come from Cajuns, and, we had when King George III decided that he liked the part of Canada, Acadia, we were all ancestors were living in, he said, you must swear allegiance to me. And as the Cajun story goes, they just swore at him. So he just rounded the lot up and shoved them onto ships, except the ones that were indigenous people, the Micmac, hid some of us. But the rest of us got on ships, and then we got spread around and dumped in South Louisiana, what's now South Louisiana. So 250 years later, my people decide that it is time for the monarch in England to apologize. It seemed like 250 years, that might be about right. So they do a big petition, and then they circulate that petition at this big gathering in Acadia, which was at the invitation for everybody come back, right? So everybody was there, and everybody's going on, and of course, apparently there was no feeling on the other side of the pond that such an apology was warranted. And then when they learned it would not be forthcoming, it was, I'm sure, a relative from Opelousas who stood up and said, why don't we just forgive them anyway and go dancing? So I have found that in many cases, many cases, that the best thing we can do is forgive them anyway and go dancing. Still the sweat of terror and creative juice. Laura was not impacted by the fire. Her house made it through, but the horror, the secondhand horror that she experienced with her neighbors made her leave. But before she left, one of the things she did is invite people to use every form of creativity to process what had happened to them. And I just remind us again, we invest in artists for a reason. We need the musicians. We need the writers, we need the dancers, we need the singers. We need those people so badly, especially when we're hurting in the aftermath of disasters. When New Orleans came and we said, well, we got a deal for you. Here's your job, your house, your car. And they're like, but my food, my music, my parade, my celebrations, my snowball, where is that? And we're like, job, house, car, that's what we got. And, they were grateful, but there was also grief. But this did not register with me until I was in Germany. And a Syrian woman said to me, it is so hard because we are so glad that they gave us a home, that they let us settle here. And she said, though, the hardest thing is I go into the home I have now and I see the home I lost. And I walk my child to school, and I'm reminded of the school that she used to go to. Everywhere I turn, everything I do calls up a memory of the old life I had. And she said, and we still grieve, and we're afraid they think we're not grateful. And it taught me that these two things have to live side by side in our hearts, maybe at all times, because life is often a combination of the two, even on any given day. So, all right. I'm so excited that this woman was the most inspirational to me in New Orleans because she was in lower ninth. She had a small business before Katrina hit. She and her family were able to evacuate and go be with relatives in Atlanta. And then she returned because she saw herself as obligated, but also she recalled to me one moment in which she saw someone much older that she had known her whole life in lower ninth trying to put things back together, and she couldn't. She said, there's no way I could stay comfortably in Atlanta when I knew what my neighbors were trying to do. So I'll let you tell her. Now that's 20 years old, I'm not a professional, so the quality is not great, but the spirit is.
It just happened. We were there just when we felt was honorable and respectful to all of our neighbors that had passed away, and we wanted to acknowledge that we realized that there was a loss in our community. And we should not just start saying, let's plan, let's rebuild, as though people weren't hurting.
So at about a year, it became clear that the people that they hadn't found yet were gone for good. And some of them, they never found their bodies, so there was no closure. But they had lost family members, and they had lost community members, and they knew it. So at a year, this was in response to my question, at what point did you begin again? At what point did you say, now we're going to undertake to recreate our community? And she said it was at that year marker, and what she decided to do was invite all the community members to bring whatever they had remaining of the people they had lost to the place in the levee where some people had literally been swept out. So they did that, and of course, it being New Orleans not too long, a band showed up. So they held this ceremony, they said goodbye to these people, and then they did a march back to the community center she had opened up in what had been a church. She decided that people needed a place to come together, and she created it. So I want to remind you of how important ritual is. As we move through stages, the rituals that whether they're secular or religious or just our family rituals and traditions, they matter so much because this is how we are able to mark a time and move on. In this case, and in New Orleans, if someone passes, we're burying them, there's this somber, closer walk with thee sort of march to the cemetery. And then when they're buried, then there's this raucous, wonderful, joyful march away from the cemetery. And it comes out of an African tradition of celebrating life at the moment of death. But in this way, she said, this is how we must learn to live, that we have to mark the moment. And there were too many people saying to New Orleanians, get over it, get on with it, move along, hurry up. And it was this moment, she said, without guilt, having honored them, we could go on and begin rebuilding. So now you might wonder, when I spoke about people not doing what you tell them to do and having a hard time getting people to mind me in disasters. So I want to turn us to Ike, because in Ike, we were experienced. We had learned so much. We were ready. And so Ike is approaching, and it's in the Gulf, and I'm listening to the news, and it's going to hit Beaumont. Rita had already hit Beaumont. My mom lives in Beaumont, and she's here, which is an unexpected, wonderful surprise. So sorry, Mom. There she is. Anyway, so I call my mom. After Rita, this is my mom. After Rita, they tore the roof off of the printing shop that she ran, and the family business. And she went in there and just, before anybody else could get to her, just piled soggy mess on her dolly and load after load, took it to the curb, cleaned up, because that's how she is, because no damn hurricane's going to tell her how she lives. So here comes Ike, and I'm like, Mom, mandatory evacuation. And she's like, Angela, I listen to the exact same news reports you do. So, which was not, was in fact not encouraging me to continue with my line of thinking. So I go about my business, and I spend the whole day, again, something we learned from New Orleanians, that so many seniors found themselves without anything to eat. And we had a meals program. We worked with a corporate partner, and we had boxes delivered to every single one of our clients that had non-perishable food for at least a week. And those boxes had been delivered, and we had already sandbagged and protected everything that we could within the agency. And I'm having this moment of like, wow. That's back when people listened to me, because, I was the CEO. And so I was like, look at us. What a good job we did. And I'm sitting on my sofa, and it's 5:30, and I think, well, now I can just take a deep breath, wait for the storm. But I think, Mom. So I call her on her cell phone, which she referred to as her car phone, and there was no answer. So then I call the house, and she answers. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? Mandatory. You're supposed to leave. And I'm like, now I'm all hyped up. Because, I thought I was going to have a moment. Instead, I'm scared because my mom's in Beaumont. Well, she ain't leaving. So I called my brother, and I said, Mom, what are you doing? And she said, well, if you really must know, I'm making a lemon meringue pie. Now, she makes some incredible lemon meringue pies. And at that time, she was making them off the trees in my yard, the Meyer lemon trees. I'd bring her that juice, and she'd make pies. So I'm like, you got to go. So I called my brother, maybe you can talk to her. Angela, she's stubborn. I said, well, try something. So he calls her and he says, Mom, I just want you to know that I have a reservation for you with the helicopter people that take folks to rigs, so you'll be first in line if we have to pull you off the roof. So she did finally leave. And then she called me and she said, well, I hope you're happy. I'm on the road and we're just sitting here. And I just had to go off and leave everything I ever worked for, and I just left that lemon meringue pie on the counter. And, you know, I felt a twinge because it's damn good pies. But her house didn't get hit, but this was my brother's house in Bridge City. Bridge City, after Ike, 90% of the homes were uninhabitable. Fortunately, my brother, we were a crew, and we did the world's fastest mucking and gutting. When I look at this, I'm reminded again that how hard life can be and how unexpectedly things can happen. And when we stood on the street cleaning out his house, I looked up and down the street and I saw all the people frozen in place, all the people uncertain about what to do or how to do it. There was one guy, though, and we said, well, what's your thought? Are you going to stay, go, clean up, rebuild? And he said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to get my pickup truck, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to get an anchor off my boat. I'm going to tie a rope to that anchor, and I'm going to tie that to my truck. And then I'm going to drive. I'm going to trail that anchor behind me. And when I get so far away, somebody says, what is that tied to your truck? I know I'll be far enough from the Gulf of Mexico. I thought that was one of the more colorful ways of saying I'm out of here, and I ain't about to do this. So reckoning comes next, and reckoning is the moment when things really start kicking off for the future, because we are inventorying our assets. This is when, if you're a helper, and you're seeing someone go through hell, helping them see what there is to work with, walking them through all the rituals that mean so much to them, helping them reflect upon what they must do, what they feel compelled to rebuild. This is the way we really help one another at this stage, is to pay close attention. And then we're really crafting our way right out of disaster. But we've got to start with the materials in hand, what's in the arena. And this strength-based approach is vital, because without it, you're just mired in loss. You've got to look at what there is to work with. By this time, also, you've probably gotten a right-sized form of expectation about what kind of help you're going to have, what the insurance company will and won't do, what FEMA will and won't do. So we say you can't build on broken, and I remind myself of that all the time, that the foundation for how we go on comes right out of our understanding about what we can do together. So I want you to see, there's a saying in community development that I really love. The leaders we need are already here. They're the people that already love and care for their communities. They're the people on the ground that know who counts and who matters and who must be at the table. And she is so much one of those leaders.
I couldn't tell you other than that I felt compelled inside my conviction that I needed to look at the bigger picture, that there are other people that are probably doing something for, sharing some of what I've learned to help them get along a little bit faster. And it's just compassion. If you think about it, if you're going through the same thing as your neighbor, these are people we know. You've been walking down the street talking to Ms. Sanchez or Mr. Johnson or Ms. Mangan. You know that they're in the same boat. When I look at my house, that's their house. The water didn't skip over and it's affecting it. And so if I can't come back to the lady who I used to sell the snowballs to my children, that's a part of what their memory is, then I'm not building community. I'm maybe building myself. And for that matter, I probably should have stayed in Atlanta.
So when she speaks about the lady and the memories, one of the things that, and you saw it in Mustafa's letter, that he felt invisible. What happens when, most of us don't realize we walk around all the time with a kind of benevolent house of mirrors. You know, just reflections of who we are and all the people that know us, that we meet, that we work with, that we're friends with, that we live side by side. These are the people that remind us in our worst moments of what we're capable of. One of my oldest friends is here, Karen. Karen always reminds me of, you know, my better self when I'm drowning in some form of misery. She also reminds me that it is possible to do something besides work. And I think that's finally sunk in. But and I owe her big for that. But I think these house of mirrors, this being able to see a reflection of ourselves and our surroundings, when that's taken away, we see it all the time amongst senior citizens, but it usually doesn't happen to most of us, that all the things that are familiar, all the people know, it's all gone at once. And people have such a difficult time rebuilding their self. They have to rebuild a self and a place. So the fact that we listen to them, that we honor them, that we pay attention to what matters to them and let them tell us that and who they were before, these are all vitally important things to do. In this case, too, she was also, again, we get back to this sense of rootedness and belonging that was so much a part of the way people lived in New Orleans. And that is something everyone craves. In the rebuilding process, I watched people come into New Orleans, fancy, smart institutes, consulting firms, you name it. Everybody showed up because they were all very much certain. We see less of this now, and we don't see it here because we wouldn't tolerate it. Although Bloomberg, I'm just going to tell you all this, Bloomberg decided after Ike that he should send a bunch of people to tell us how to do long-term recovery. Because, you know, New York had Superstorm Sandy. And like, New York has a storm, it becomes a superstorm. And we're just like, they had like one superstorm, and they were experts. So we had to be polite and spend a whole morning listening to them tell us how to do something we already knew a lot more about than they did. But largely, in New Orleans, there were all kinds of people telling them what to do with the land, telling them what they should build and what they shouldn't, with no idea what any of it meant. And so those leaders like Patricia and others, they convened people, they brought people together, they listened, they made a community exercise out of what got done. And those things lasted. Letting no invisible people see the people in front of you, listen to them, gather people together. And the instinct we have in this city, I see it over and over again, hurry up and get the money out. Hurry up and get this done. Hurry up and get, and I want to say to the leaders in the room, when there's something telling you, we need to pause, we need to listen, we need to tune in better, pay attention to that, because you can be fast and useless. And we don't want to fall into that. So, when people are griping and complaining at you because this, that, or another thing has not happened too, it's important to reframe it always and to say to yourself, what would this look like if it worked well for them? And that opening question of what would this look like if it worked well for everyone in the arena? This is important. When I was in Australia, I went 5 years in a row and worked with Homeland Security and QFES, Queensland Fire and Emergency, and the Victoria Fire Service. And amongst all those, one thing that they do in Australia is first responders don't get to leave until everyone in the arena is connected to a long-term recovery service provider. Here, we let our first responders sail in heroically, do their thing, and then deactivate. And then there's just a break, and then everyone has to scramble. All of you helpers have to scramble to find the people that need help. And in past disasters, one of the reasons we were so effective with Katrina and Ike is that FEMA handed off the data directly to the organizations that were helping people walk these stages. And now they don't. So everyone has to spend weeks trying to find one another, find the right source of help, connect. But the central question is, what would it look like? What would rebuilding look like if it worked well for everyone in the arena? So this is advice to leaders. Don't wait, work. Do what you can with what you have where you are right now. Again, I turn to musicians for inspiration because when the musicians play on the street of New Orleans, they don't have a venue. They don't wait for the crowd. They don't wait to be paid. They go out, they open up, and they pull out their instrument and they start playing. And this is really, when we approach the rebuilding of our communities, we start playing because the money may come or not, the crowd may clap for you or not, but you have to start the work. This woman was, she was a true force in nature. She was an education leader before the storm and then decided, she's a member of the Vietnamese community in East New Orleans. And this is her story about how she tackled the job of schools. When she first tried to get a school started, the state of Louisiana directed her that it would not allow her to use a particular building. And they said, because you're putting six-year-old children on the second floor, that's not allowed. And she said, well, then how will we have school for them? Because right now, New Orleans doesn't have any first floors. All we have is second floors. That's all that's left. But
and we gutted the school, and we opened the school September the 7th, 2006. Oh, it was like aches and pains. So we had to do registration.
Tell them about enrollment now, Cindy, because
466 in that school.
What was opening day like?
Oh, it was actually crazy. I led Einstein Charter because I serve on the board. I said, you know what? Bid is for the entire community. Use my office, do registration. Because the school was being gutted out, we didn't want to increase the liability of kids getting hurt or anything. So I said, use my office, do your interview. We had to do interviews for teachers to come in. We got to order supplies. We had to educate the parents about the school. We did uniform. I mean, we actually had uniform set up. I had to work with a uniform company. I worked with the Louisiana Family Recovery Corporation to get free uniform in for these kids. Because mom and dad's like, well, I don't have the funds. I said, but I need to know if your child's coming to my school. If they come in regular clothes, I won't be able to know. And we're in a very vulnerable community. We have no security. What if another child comes in and they're not in the proper uniform? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, well, you know what? I can't argue. Let me go find some resources. That's when the Louisiana Family Recovery Corporation came in and gave every child 3 pairs of uniforms. So I'm like, plus, that's great. First day, kids came in, they were excited. And I think that was my biggest joy, was they were so excited they reunite with their old classmates. They're like, oh, I haven't seen you. Where have you been? And you could see kids, just laughing and talking. They weren't worried about what class, what homework they were in. They were just happy to see each other. And I think that's one of the reasons why I went back and fought for this school, because I knew that the school would reunite the kids, provide them a comfort level.
So this is maybe a good spot to say thank you to the educators, and some of you are here, that welcomed people from New Orleans into the schools and made them feel at home. But New Orleans fought hard for its schools, and some of that battle was won and some lost. The schools are just one of the places that welcome people back after a storm. I was really taken by apparently the older Vietnamese residents of East New Orleans had little sympathy for any complaints about the suffering or the heat or so forth. So if you have parents that can pull this out, you're likely going to find yourself not offering much in the way of whining as you go through. We turn now to Puerto Rico, and I'm going to point out that you're seeing a lot of women. In the immediate dramatic phase of disasters, we see a lot of men in uniforms, doing things dramatically on the news. And that's month, 2 months. The long-term recovery work is often armies of women who do what these women did, is gather people, find resources, figure it out, stitch it up, sew it together. So this woman came back. She grew up in Puerto Rico, was educated, working elsewhere, saw our community struggling, and came back. In Puerto Rico, they learned, some people there went without reliable water supply and without electricity for a year. And in that year, they improvised all kinds of solutions that they liked so much, many of them they kept. And that was the case with Christina. They moved to solar. They took one building in each community, which is what I'm really desperately hoping that the city of Houston will finally do, is provide true resilience hubs, those places of refuge that are guaranteed shelter and for people. But they've done that, and the way it started was with a kitchen. It always starts with gathering and feeding people and hosting. But they invested in water filtration systems, they invested in solar. So in each of these rural communities, there's a space that people know will be available. She's talking about every time they had to go get anything, it took 3 hours because roads were out, which was just like the situation I saw recently when I was in Buncombe County. So these landing places, these places of welcome, when we move out of the sheltering phase, it's all moving into community centers. Community centers are the most vital institutions we build, and we have a long, long history of doing it, and we do it everywhere. In Zaatari, in the desert in Jordan, 80,000 people, sand, and the first 3 boards, I think, the people who were being settled there from Syria, they made a community center. We just know that we're better together, and we know to put a roof over these gathering spots. So this is a bulletin board, and it's got all the same, it's a flyers for all the same things that you can get right here at Baker Ripley in Houston. There are the language classes, there's the sewing class, there's the job search help, all of that. And so I see these everywhere in the world, and we stand them up in whatever we have available. And we go back to Sharon and Lakeview, because once she got her trailer, she decided that the purpose of that trailer should be to have it be a community center so that it was supplied and you could get whatever you needed there. She had a hookup to get the internet, so she just opened it up to her community. Her house in the background is 8 feet higher. Her husband was a contractor, so they just raised the house and they put it right above where the water level was. I remind you because it's important for Houston. We would not be able to recall the name of the hurricane that hit in 2005 if the levees hadn't failed. So these disasters, the most catastrophic ones, the King Lake fires was a failed power line started. The failure of the levees in Lakeview, a gentleman told me, I rode out the storm, and the next morning I got up and I walked outside and the sun was shining. And I thought I should check on my neighbors. And as I looked up the street, I saw what I thought was a roll of gray carpet rolling down the street. And then I realized it was water. And before I could get to my front door, it was at my ankles. Before I could grab a few belongings, it was at my waist. And the water rose and covered the first story of his house. We pay attention to the non-glamorous infrastructure because not to do so is catastrophic. So in Houston, when you see people and you hear people at the city talk about investments made in infrastructure and the need to do it, the need to address the neglect of our water system, pay attention, because a nightmare for Houston is a storm that takes out a water supply for 3 million people. Now we have a disaster and a public health catastrophe. We don't want that. We are a strong city, but we're a vulnerable city, and these are the things that we should be responsible to take care of. So they're giving me the rundown here of what they've done and who they've helped and what difference it's made. So it's all this navigating these bureaucratic systems that we use. We support one another through that. So this came from someone really important to me, who said, she's essentially everything she ever dreamt she wanted to be, but brought about because of a storm and a personal catastrophe. So when I was working at NRG, we were also moving my brother, who had a catastrophic motorcycle accident to tears. So I would go to NRG and then go and visit him. And Teresa, who's just a model for all of us in terms of perseverance and the careful tending, all the nurturing, tending, stitching up, are the things that people do that are quiet and small and never get recognition. This is how communities come back. This is how families come back. And she said, you know, and this is why we need to be there for one another, because you have to make the hardest calls, the hardest decisions when you're bereft and broken and hurting. So I do want you to pay attention, though, to the people around you who do the maintaining, who do the cultivating, who do the hosting, the tending, the exquisite care people provide to one another. They're really the heroes. And until COVID happened, you know, and we had to redefine an essential worker, you know, a lot of those people had gone unnoticed. And I hope if we didn't learn anything else from COVID, I really hope we remember who turned out to be essential. So, all right. Now, look, I'm going to talk about feral hogs because, you know, up until now, we've been seeing all the good in people and all the wonderful things we can do for one another and how great we can be together. But there's a whole other group of human beings, and there, thank God, not many of them. They do get our attention, though, because they're perfectly awful. You know, in Texas, you know, feral hogs, we don't like them, right? And most Texans think you either, like, pin them up or shoot them. And one real Texas story a buddy of mine told me about feral hogs coming up on his concrete porch in his house outside the city, and how everybody just got up and went and shot him and then went back to watching. I'm like, that's horrifying. But on the other hand, they kind of dig crap on everything, dig up everything, ruin everything. And those people show up when cities are vulnerable and people are hurting. They show up. They're the contractors that come and take the money but don't do the work. They're the land grabbers that come and snooker people out of their homes. These are people, that really happens. And so when people get to this stage, they need advocates. They need people standing with them. They need people who won't be so desperate they lose discernment, because we've all made a bad decision because we were in a hurry, or the situation we were in was so uncomfortable. So be with people as they're rebuilding. The woman that you saw in the Vietnamese community, the other thing they did is, instead of each person in that community buying a roof because they all needed one, they pooled all their money and hired one contractor. And by doing that, they could guarantee everybody got a similar quality roof. It all happened roughly at the same time. The materials were cheaper, bought in bulk. And as people wanted to know whether they could come back, it wasn't a one-by-one, one-off decision. It was a whole community decision because they all could have a roof. So we're also making tough choices about what to rebuild and what not to. When I was in Rolling Fork, I saw this, and if you can't read it, it says, "Do not scrap." Because what New Orleanians remember with tremendous pain and grief is the bulldozers that came in to take down houses that they hadn't intended to abandon. And these leave terrible scars on people's hearts and on the landscape. So we must remember not to scrap. And I think this is so beautiful, and I remind myself of it everywhere I go before I set foot in a community. Our first task in approaching another people, another culture, another religion is to first take off our shoes, for the place is holy. Else we find ourselves treading on people's dreams. More serious still, we may forget that God was there before we arrived. And this is the way we approach helping people. Sacred ground, carefully. At the same time, we've got to orchestrate the three-legged stool, public, private, philanthropic, working in concert. This is a lesson that Houston's taught so many other cities. I know I brought it there. The way we almost instantaneously form tables of leaders from all sectors, we not only expect to get along, we largely do. There's generally a lot of respect for one another at the table, and we saw that part of the triumph of our response to Katrina came out of the fact that Mayor Whitewood and Judge Eccles were quite good at convening and also insisting that you come with your homework. I really liked that part. It cut down a lot on the amount of time people got to talk, because Mayor White would only let you talk if you had done your work. This was great. So we act as if there's enough to go around. In Germany, they gathered up everything they thought the million or so people migrating in might need, and in doing so, they organized it. I was so proud of them, so German, so organized. They inventoried it, they marked the boxes, and with the donations they got, they supplied every single place in Germany that was housing anyone that was newly arrived, and there was so much additional supply that they started trucking it to the camps in the frontline states of Jordan and Lebanon. There's enough to go around. We have enough. We have more than enough. We've produced more than we need of almost everything. We don't have a scarcity problem. We have a distribution problem. So remember that in disasters. Our job is to see how it gets distributed. And then I turn again to Australia for the way they celebrate newcomers to Australia. Again, enough to go around. In Australia, I heard a term I'd never heard anywhere else, and it was called being overhoused. Well, I am overhoused because I live by myself in a big house. My son's grown. It's just me. And so if you're overhoused in Australia, the Australian government decided, because they couldn't build housing quickly enough for the people coming, they decided that you could make available a portion of your house. They would allow you to do it, and they would help you with the cost associated of creating a separate entrance or putting in a wall. And so by doing that, then now incoming immigrants, new neighbors, literally settled in next to people in communities, one at a time. And what a big surprise. It turned out that all these people that had concerns and objectives could tell you that, of course, there was nothing to worry about because their immigrant was wonderful. And this also extended to the way they handled employment. There was an agency that would set you up with an employee that would be paid by the agency to work in your business, because convincing businesses that these were people that were not only employable but excellent employees was hard to do out of the gate. But again, it turned out after you spent some months with them, you determined that you had the one and only extraordinary, very special, newly arrived person that was ideal. So enough to go around, enough jobs, enough houses, enough everything. I love to study the people that will recreate lives and communities, these true nurturers. We're learning that we have to be careful what we recreate, and we want to be thoughtful about it and discerning. And in some cases, we're learning in Houston that there are places we can't keep building in. And the one word that Texans don't like is retreat. And it's hard for us to accept there are places we should withdraw from because they're not viable for the future. So we've done all this and we're home again. So what does it mean to be home again? The idea that we are in a place where we are known, where we can earn, learn, and belong, like universal aspirations, where we can see ourselves again in our surroundings, where things are recognizable. This is so powerful. In some cases, home, again, is less a place and more a fact of who's there. And this came, a 13-year-old wrote this. As we were resettling folks from Louisiana, Houston was also hitting its peak of incoming migrants from all over the world. And so their stories, and they were settling in next to each other. And as I watched that happen, I began to understand how common all of this was. All of us want the same things: earn, learn, belong. We want to believe that we have something of value to offer that the community wants. We want to be treated as an unfinished product, somebody that can still grow and learn and adopt and adapt. and we want to belong. We want to feel like we're entitled to a small space of ground that we're walking upon. So this, of course, became the Baker Ripley tagline, but it was inspired by seeing the people from Somalia and Pakistan right next to the people from New Orleans and right across from the people that were coming in from Colombia, and hearing that all were hungering for the same things. So, and this 13-year-old wrote this. It was 1999, and I remember my dad telling me to be a good boy, follow your mother's directions. He told us, take care of your little brother and sister. I was 5 years old. My brother was 3. My sister was 2 months. The day my dad came to America, my heart broke in two. Outside my house, there was a rock. I spent 8 days sitting on the rock, hoping for my dad to come back. I didn't have the feeling to eat or drink. My dad spent 50 days on the way here. Then, in 2003, my dad decided to bring my mother to America, and he did. It was in the afternoon, and my mother said, "Be good kids with your uncle." And I was thinking, why is she telling us that? And then my uncle said, let's go out on the boat and go fishing, and we did. And when I got back, my mother had gone to America. And it was 3 years until I could go. And I spent 22 days in a trailer to get here. And finally, I was with my mom and dad, and I could breathe again. In some cases, we are that place where people can finally breathe again. And the form of patriotism that completely fills my heart and soul is to remain that place, to fight to be that place, to be the best of what the people coming here believe us to be. So I think now we turn to, this is now home. So home for me too. So I think I've thought a lot about my own situation and my mom, although you may have deduced by now she's formidable. But we also think, what's going to happen to us? Because she's about to be 90, I'm 71, and what kind of begins as a joke between us about buying a getaway has now become a plan with an indefinite timetable, because we know our reckoning will come, a day when we're no longer capable of being on our own response team, when we know we'll be amongst the stranded, 2 independent women who did not believe in being rescued or retreating or giving up. We want to stay here, not because we're foolish, but because we love who we are together in this troubled region. As fragile as it is, and as fragile as we are, I cannot let go of the Gulf Coast. I don't think I'll ever be one of those people who get away and talk about my people from a higher perch. I love the Gulf Coast cities and culture. We live up close to all the vulnerabilities, keenly attuned to the cycle of create, destroy, create. Beginning again is our cultural sauce. We know how to stretch a perfect moment, and we know how to collapse suffering into celebration. We wrap ourselves in our imperfect traditions and wade right into the deep water. I love my people. I love all of you. And that's all I got. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay, if you have an interest in reading, you want to, if you have an interest in reading it, the QR code will take you to a summary of the stages and some, feel free to go to my website, lots, and don't nag me about a book or anything, all right? Okay. Love y'all. Good night.
Again, please, another round of applause for Miss Angela Blanchard. Before we close out here, just some closing remarks from our president, Lauren Blanchard.
And I'll be very brief. I'm the other Blanchard, by the way. And I tell you, when I heard you, Angela, there's so many similarities. My mother's 92. My mother lives with me. And my mother was affected by Hurricane Rita. I was affected by Hurricane Katrina. I have cousins who are Trahans, very much like yours. So, there's something about the fact that there could be some family lineage that's here, right? Yeah, without a doubt. Thank you all so much for being here. I never knew in a million years that I would be standing here in Houston, and not only because of the fact that I lead this wonderful university, but because I came to a place that now feels like home every day. So many of my friends and relatives from Hurricane Katrina and Rita, they migrated here, and they never thought in a million years that this would be their home. And now I have the great pleasure of not only being here with my family, but also many of my extended family members and friends who didn't understand what was happening when all of these hurricanes were coming our way. But we continue to hear, and I will be brief, we continue to hear that Houston is the place that you must go. And they said, not because of the resources, but because there are people there who care and who are going to make your lives different. And that in some way, you will find that Houston is the place that learned how to help people navigate through new beginnings. And all of that is true. And I never understood exactly what was underneath all of that until tonight. Thank you so much, Angela. As you mentioned before, that people wanted to hear, New Orleanians in particular, wanted to hear that others say that they were sorry for what you went through. But I'll say to you that what Houstonians need to hear is our gratitude and to say thank you. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Houston. Thank you for bringing hope. Thank you for helping us to know what new beginnings look like. There are so many people, including myself, who's much better. Our lives are much better. Even though we went through the storm, our lives are much better because of you. So tonight, the celebration continues. Right around the corner, we have food and drinks. I don't know if they're libations or not, but it's probably going to be punch, but right around the corner, and spend more time with Angela. And so thank you all for being here. Please know that we do these lecture series on a monthly basis to have all these great topics. This is the first time we've done an evening one. It's usually during the day, but I think that certainly based on not only the number of people, but based on the topic and more importantly, the real presence that we felt here tonight, we'll be doing this again and again. Welcome to the University of Houston downtown. For those of this is your first time, don't make it your last time. Have a good evening.